Welcome to the Stoa. The Stoa is a digital campfire where we cohere and dialogue about what matters most at the knife's edge of what's happening now. All right, check-ins. I'm feeling kind of like aggressively playful. And I feel a little bit of a joy saying that. So welcome to the Stoa. I am the steward of the Stoa, Peter Lindbergh, also known as DJ Delicious sometimes. And we're here at the knife's edge to discuss collective presencing. And Rhea Bach, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, is here today, and she's going to share her thoughts on her practice that she's developed. And I was a little bit of a naughty boy because last minute I tagged in Richard to see if he wanted to host the thing because he's more familiar with Rhea's work than I am. So Richard will be hosting, kind of facilitating the question period, and after Rhea's talk. So how, or her sharing after she shares her thoughts. So how will look, Rhea will share her thoughts, then we'll open up for Q&A. If you have a question, just write in the chat box, and then Richard will call on you to mute it and facilitate that discussion. Unless he wants to take me back in. All right, so that being said, I'll hand it over to Rhea.
Just to say, my name is Ria, means Maria, but you skip M and A, yeah? So that's my first name, officially Maria on my passport. But
it's probably one of the reasons why I wanted Richard to host it as well.
I can probably ask more interesting questions even than what is your name and how do we pronounce it. The first one that comes to mind, having some familiarity with your work, but I still feel like I'm a novice, is you've written this book called Collective Presencing, and maybe it would be useful to talk before we get to the collective part about what is presence, what is it for, how do we get there, why do you like it? What do you know about presence? Can we visit there?
Well, what is presence? For me, presence has to do a lot with being embodied, being in your body, aware of your body, and feeling grounded and centered and open. It's the whole thing about collective presencing is like, can we use the stance of that you cultivate, let's say in meditation or in any practice, basically, we cultivate that stance while being in a conversation with each other? And that was the driving question, I think, which maybe not articulate at the beginning of the process, but that's what made us move into this whole project, let's say, that eventually brought this whole model and practice out. So I think the practice is, do I realize when I'm more or less in presence, or am I taken up in ideas, or am I more in emotions, and if I notice I'm not really present, do I know how I can come back? That's how I say, how I can come back to presence and openness and being in this engagement with the world. Also short, but
if you say that you've kind of stumbled into this research question of how do we cultivate a stance of meditation while we're in relationship and conversation. If that question wasn't clear when you started, what was guiding you? How did you know what to do?
That was very interesting, yes. At that point in time, which is like, I don't know, 10 years ago, in some what we call circle practice in a conversation, in a dialogue. In some conversations, you feel like something's happening. You feel like there's a certain quality in the conversation that's, let's say, beyond a normal conversation. And at that point, we were so intrigued. We called it the magic in the middle. Because there was something about when you just attend to the middle and not really speak to each other, or not really like, yeah, I agree with you, but kind of being aware of what was going on through the conversation, through the dialogue. There was something that happened that we were fascinated about, or at least some of us, and we call it the magic in the middle. And so we were kind of hoping that it would happen, yeah, and not knowing what it actually was, or how to get there. Or the first ever gathering we did, we had I think a 3-day gathering where finally, as facilitation team, we said, like, we don't have any program, we don't have any proposals, we just drop it all. And then in that afternoon, and some people went walking and some people did whatever, and somehow, magically, almost everybody converged into a circle at some point, and we had like a 2-hour dialogue, which was like with that quality. And that sets me off on finding out more about it.
So if you found the way to this magic by giving up on your role as host, so there could be a way of experiencing that as a disappointment. Like it could be an impossible riddle. How do we get back there? And so I'm curious what you've learned in the subsequent years of like what's the pathway back to the magic? Like if what you were doing didn't work and it was only your surrender and release that got you there, is there something more active and intentional that you know how to do now?
As a host of this process, it's still, you have not much control or influence, but it's how you are present in the group itself, and what are the questions you're bringing, how is your presence in the group. Can you invite people to maybe a deeper sense of presence? But you really need to let go of any attachment, because what I noticed, because we use a practice not to meditate or to have a nice dialogue, we use a practice to actually get to some new insights around a question that really matters. So it's not just for the sake of doing it. We actually want some real insights. And if the question matters to us, then you get a whole bunch of attachments, let's say, on all kinds of things. So you first need to work that through, like things need to be spoken, needs to be checked out with each other, dropped, maybe there's some tension, and can we still again and again go back to presence. And it's not easy, especially when you have a stake in the in the question, in the topic.
Well, that's another puzzle. I wonder if you're going to keep throwing paradoxes at us. So you've got a question that really matters, but then you're not attached to the outcome. How do you discover a question that matters? Where do they come from?
And that's indeed a whole art in itself. And I come from, let's say, a lineage that's called the art of hosting conversations that matter. And there it is one of the real crucial capacities you need to train yourself in, or as a team you train yourself in. Like, if people want to have a conversation that matters, many times when you ask them, like, what is the question? They state a question, but many times the question is kind of on a deeper level. So you need to have a conversation about what is it actually? And I'm trained and worked as a psychotherapist and a coach for long. So I know what people bring on a level, like, this is the problem. Mm-hmm. Many times what is the problem is something that's on a lower level. So I'm kind of used to look for that level. And when we organize a retreat or a workshop or with collective presencing, we do that work, let's say, upfront with the team that is hosting the event. Like, what is the question that we really care for? And yeah, but that word is not right. And we really take time to craft that question really well until we're all saying, like, yeah, that's the question. Yeah.
Do you, in your everyday life, like today, right now, do you have a stable of questions in development? Like, do you wake up in the morning and you've got this sense of this, you're kind of farming these big questions that are been hovering around in your sleep, and you're ready to pick one up? Like, do you have one that you're present to now that's taking your attention?
It's not that I wake up with them, but yeah. I'm sitting with this question these days. So I'm very at ease with all these circles and dialogues and conversations, but what I don't know is how to build a business. That's like really foreign to me. It's like, I really feel like I'm 4-year-old and I don't know anything about it. And I have a huge intuition, but in that topic, it feels like, my intuition is not working. Please guide me. Take me by the hand. And so we were talking about, with my partner, with other people in the collective presencing world, let's say. And we came to this question recently, like, could we find a collective practice where we actually build that entrepreneurial spirit together? Like, we know we have built consent and generative decision-making processes that we can describe and that we can disseminate and everybody can learn it. But can we develop, can we find a collective practice where this entrepreneurial spirit is actually helped, supported by all of us? And doesn't mean we need to be in the same company at all. Because many of us have have their own company, or with 2 or 3, or, I mean, I think lots of people here just have their own private business, I guess. So that's something that's on my mind, and that I can feel that it's like, and that works in me, like.
So assuming, taking your own advice, that you arrive with a question and there's a question underneath that.
Could be.
What I know of your work, you're an author and a teacher and a facilitator and a therapist, and you've got tons of different competencies and skills. And then there's, for some reason, even though there's some billions of businesses out there, you're finding an obstacle to you making your own business. That's kind of puzzling to me when you've got such other, plenty of other competencies. Is there some obstacle that sits between you and that entrepreneurial spirit?
That could well be, and it's pretty unknown territory for me. I mean, I'm self-employed, as they call it, since the 90s has always gone well. I've never done marketing or PR or anything. And a couple of years ago, I started with 3 others to found a cooperative, because how can I be real and have integrity to advise others on collective presence, on collective practices, on decision making or conversations that matter, if I'm not in the business myself? Yeah. So we have this company, we try lots of things out, but this doesn't mean that my income goes up or at all. And especially not now, because people cancel all kinds of events. So there's something, and I can see some people have something that I don't have. And I wonder, can we spread it? Because I see so many people who want to build a better world, don't want to go to business as usual, and are in this spread. Like, yeah, but I need to feed my kids and I need to pay my rent, and there's not enough income coming in, and we're like in between 2 worlds. Like, what is the collective practice that we could help each other with? It's like, but I don't know. I can only hold the question or help hold the question.
I can feel how that question matters, right? Like, it's got some, it's mattering to me as well. So with that question, that's the starting point. Then if you were applying your own methodology to yourself, dare I say it, what would be the next step once you've got this question? How do you do collective presencing about it?
We actually started with our little, let's say, core team of collective presencing and a few friends. And I can say we didn't come out with clarity yet. It's an ongoing process. And that makes me wonder, like, what are assumptions that we may be holding that we haven't uncovered? Because for me, a dialogue and collective presencing is a generative dialogue in let's say, the words of Otto Scharmer. It's like, many times, as in therapy, many times it's like when you can uncover an assumption, suddenly like, aha, the world of solutions, of insights, it's way bigger than I thought about around my question. So it feels as if we haven't uncovered some of these assumptions that are actually holding us back from new insights. That's what I think.
So I'm gonna jump in. So Rich was warming up the room right now with because he has really tight question game at the knife's edge, which I appreciate. And so if you have any questions, just write in the chat box, and then I'll unmute you and you can read it, or I will read it on your behalf. And we just got one from Tyson. So Tyson, if you'd like to read your question.
Yeah, thank you, Rich and Ria. I'm enjoying this dialogue, and I'm very interested in the magic in the middle, and I really enjoy being in that space. I'm curious what you do to create a container or a shared intention or context or dialogue, like language, to invite people into engaging that unknown in the middle, rather than maybe speaking from like what they already know. Maybe the temptation, like if a question comes up, the temptation to give advice and to solve it, rather than like really be immersed in the question. So I'm just curious if you have like agreements or what type of things you do to create that space.
Yeah. I mean, you can offer some guidelines or some principles, but it's really hard for people, especially when the conversation or the topic, the question matters to them. First of all, we work with a talking piece, like whenever somebody holds the piece, even if that's a pen or whatever it is, that means this person speaks and the other ones listen. And you can move the piece from 1 to 1, but to slow the conversation even more down, you can put the talking piece in the middle of the circle, and then say, you can sense whenever you need to speak. And I always explain, we try to speak from a place where that you haven't been thinking about beforehand. So it's not an idea I already had before I entered the room. That's where we want to go. Can I speak something I haven't spoken anywhere yet? And that's pretty hard. It doesn't mean you cannot tell a story or something that comes up, because sometimes a story comes up that you might not even understand why it comes up. Yeah. And sometimes you have to check yourself, like, I don't know why, but this seems like I need to tell this right now here. And then you will notice that somebody else picks up a meaning from that story, and suddenly it reveals why it was meaningful in that guiding question. And so it's really important that you inhabit that space yourself, or the ones who are holding the space, that you can convey that with how you speak. If you say, we do it like this and this and this and this, yeah, it's, can you speak yourself? And have you worked with your team, the 1 or the 2 or the 3 others that hold it with you, to be in that space together? Have you trained yourself, actually? Have you practiced enough? Yeah, that's the short version, I would say. Yeah.
So if you have any questions, and maybe you can practice it too, just kind of, like lean into what questions emerge and just write it down. And when I was leaning into that, this question emerged right away. Can you measure wisdom?
Can you measure wisdom?
And why I think I asked that is a lot of people are giving me advice these days, like I should get more sleep, do this, do that. And then the question that keeps coming up, can you measure wisdom? And I don't think you can. And if a question or the question is the foundation of wisdom, then you can't really measure the accuracy of what question to pick. So you have to rely on a different source. So I'm curious, what comes alive?
So I think measurement comes from an ordered system, if I can use that model, where you can measure more or less. Wisdom, I don't think, belongs in that. But we do seem to have a capacity in ourselves, in I call it subtle sensing, that we have, where we can sometimes feel like this is relevant, not this is it, or this is my question, or this is what I really need to do. We do have an inner, and Jensen calls that a felt sense, and he writes with capitals. And I always give this, or he gives this, like when somebody writes poetry, and you write your poem, and like there is a word, but it's not this word. I know it needs to be another word for the poem to be good. So we do have a sense, and it's a very precise sense. Like, it's not this word, it's close, but it's not this one. And until you found it, then you say like, yeah, that was the word. So that kind of sensing capacity that we have, where it sits, I don't know, somewhere in us, and it's not at all rational. It's not even emotional. There's something energetic about it, although I don't want to be new agey about it, but that kind of sense is what you need to start to recognize in yourself and start to practice and check things out. Like I used like to train myself, like being in a big workshop or a conference, and then I would check like, okay, we go to eat and there's a big dining room, and I was like, I go with my sense where I need to sit. Like that table, that chair, that's mine for this noon or this dinner. And then see whoever shows up. And sometimes that was amazing, and sometimes it was like, I don't know why I was sitting here. But you can have these little tiny exercises for yourself to kind of train yourself in that way.
So I have another question that is burning up. It's just like wrestling out of me, but I'm going to place it because Rich said Abby had a question. So I might say that for the end. We'll see how the suspense goes. But Abby, if you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thanks. Hi, Ria. I've been reading your work, Collective Presencing, the book, and
Oh, wow.
It's been great. It's really resonating, especially coming from a focusing background.
Okay.
You mentioned a lot about, inner process and doing the deep work. And so I guess my question is, I'm wondering the modularity of the circle format in various different organizations, and if this is only, if you've taken it to various different locations and maybe expanded to organizations, because it seems like, I don't know if it's a prerequisite to have done that personal work and be willing to look deep in order to participate, or maybe not.
Yeah. We do have brought, let's say, what I called art of hosting, which is a community and a practice and a whole field of practice. It's about conversations that matter. And it goes always starts always with a 3-day training. And it has been brought in like into the European Commission, although it's called participatory leadership. They didn't like art of hosting, it was a bit too fluffy or whatever. So it's practices about conversations and about dialogues and in all kinds of ways, with big groups, small groups, conferences, stakeholder gatherings. But what I want to point to is that if you have like, let's say the biggest thing we ever did was probably a 2-day conference with 800 people. You do have a team then of 6, 7, 8, 10 people. And what we try in these teams is to come to that level of co-creation. Like, what are we sensing? What is the client saying? What are the people? What is the actual question? Like, and from that sensing capacity in this core team, that's from where we do the work. Yeah. And now after 10 years, you can see how this practice is spreading, because some DGs, how we would just like ministries within the European Commission, have adapted this approach in as their way of working. So I'm not saying that collective presencing itself is like known anywhere, but like the leading up to it, like, can we actually start to listen in meetings instead of wanting to fight or wanting to win? That's getting some ground, even in the European Commission. So, yeah.
So it sounds like the participants don't actually have to have this sensing capability to begin with?
Actually, everybody has it, but we're just not used to use it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But if you are at ease with inviting people into that space and in naming it in whatever words you can give it that you think they can kind of relate to, if you feel comfortable to invite them into that space, most of the times people come with you and are actually happy that they can finally talk. Like not debate, but have a conversation. Sometimes you need to, like in the commission, you need to say like, hey people, you're not representing your company or you're not representing your country. You're here as a person. With your expertise, of course, but you're here as a person. And can we speak from that level? It's, of course, it's different paradigm. But.
Yeah, I have another follow-up question, if that's okay. In the book, you talk a lot about following aliveness and follow what's alive. And it could be something that if I just don't feel alive to do it now, I'm just not going to do it. I kind of wonder how that plays out, because something else that's in my mind is like focus and discipline. And that I don't know how the two can really blend together, because it seems like I'm just following my feelings if I'm just following what's alive. Or maybe it's kind of the felt sense, like the somatic piece. So maybe you could dive into that a little bit.
Yeah. What is, I would say, healthy discipline? And what is beating yourself up? Yeah. What is doing even stuff like, for me, it's like doing my accounts needs to happen now and then. I really don't like it, although I can do it well, but I don't like doing it. From psychology, is if you put yourself under stress, like I need to do this now, and when the discipline is that kind of stuff, that kind of energy, it will always trigger the opposite that will say, fuck it, I don't do it. No? Because there is pressure, then something comes to balance it. But if the discipline is like yesterday, I had a conversation with my partner that went not well. I had the discipline to go sit on a meditation cushion because I want to. I want to step out of the emotional charge and I want to come back to balance. That's also discipline. Not because I have to or I need to, but because I choose to do that. Not easy. That's also discipline. But it comes from a different place.
What if you're like a writer and you're like, I have a writer's block, but then like actually having the discipline to write out things help me push to the next step? What about in that scenario?
I think it's because you want to, actually. And you know that it helps to start writing anyway. It's not because of an authority that says now you have to write. Even if it's an inner authority, it's more like I choose to do this because I know it helps, even if it's not easy. Okay, thanks. And I'm always impressed to hear that people read my work, because you never know, you know.
It's some good stuff. So Zach, can you put yourself off mute and ask your question? Where is Mr. Zach? I'm gonna.
I don't see his face, so okay.
He just jumped off. Oh, there he is.
No, he doesn't.
I've had some other questions come up in the midst as well, but unless Peter says otherwise, I'm going to follow the directive and ask the question that I posted initially. Yeah, Ria, when you were speaking closer to the beginning, you were talking about like a workshop or like retreat context, I think, where I think you said something to the effect of like on the front end of that, there's a lot of work to like refine the question that people want to circle around. And from what I'm remembering, like there was some suggestion that there is like a point at which there's like at least relative group consensus around like what the question really is that people want to dig in on. I'm wondering, like in your experience, you know, is reaching that consensus typical on these kinds of settings? How necessary is it? And, you know, if you don't reach it, how does that change the experience? Like, can you speak to the relationship between like finding that group consensus and like the quality of the circle maybe?
Okay. I first want to speak about that word consensus, because consensus many times mean like, oh, we need to talk and talk and talk until everybody can agree with it. And from what I'm talking about is not about agreement. In these teams, let's say, hosting teams, facilitation teams, when we try to come up with what is our guiding question for the next retreat, indeed, is more like, is our felt sense of everyone, is it in alignment with each other? That's different than agreeing. It's more like it feels real, it feels right, it feels the right question. It's not like, oh yeah, I can agree, you know? Okay, let's go with that. It needs to be alive in each of us. And many times when groups use consensus, it's more like in the area of, oh, we first had a conflict and now we need to come to consensus. And there is, most of us who have been there have done that. We don't want to go to consensus, but then there is the consent decision making, but I won't go into that. But for collective presencing and how we, in teams that host conversations for others, it's not that kind of consensus where we agree. It's more an alignment of sensing that this is the question that is that's most meaningful. I'm not sure if I can explain it very well. It's very, sometimes a very subtle nuance there.
Do you have a follow-up question, Zach?
But because part of your question was to be these circles the most generative. The question, of course, you need to speak to people who are joining the conversation or the dialogue. But to have a generative conversation or a generative dialogue, in that regard, it's really informative to understand or learn about the 4 levels of listening and conversation that Otto Scharmer uses, and to really understand what generative means, how it is different than agreeing or being even understanding each other on an empathic way. But it's more like, indeed, like what Abby named, like does this bring more life into our organization or our circle, or does it generate energy? Yeah, that.
So since there's no questions in the chat box, I think people for some reason, maybe me and Rich can start playing about sourcing the question that feels most alive. Can you hear me? I'm just changing my mic. Okay. So the question that's coming up is, how do you make love to the unknown?
Say that again. How to make love?
Maybe I'll reword it. Like, how do we make love to the unknown?
Yeah. In the beginning, when we were in this process of uncovering this all, we talked a lot about the future, and Otto Schammer also talks about the future is already here. Somehow, myself and others, like, yeah, we look at this, it's now and the future, and it's like linear. And I wanted to get rid of that linear idea. And that's how I came up with like a potential. There is always potential in people, in relationships, in groups of people, in organizations. There's more potential than what is already present. But then you actually need to kind of love that thing that is not there yet. Yeah, that unknown potential of yourself, or from your organization or your group of friends. And the best thing to relate with it is like when you have children, you don't know when they're 8 they want to be a footballer or a teacher or a pianist, but you hold them, and you hold that potential that can go that way or all kinds of ways. And it's unknown. You don't know where they end up 10 years later, and even 20 years later. And still you are in love with that, what's in them, even you haven't seen it. Yeah. And that's also for us, I think, especially in this time, like there's something unknown that's going on. There's some unknown potential that might come to manifestation. It might not, but it might. And can we just, be in love with that? Can we, instead of like, oh, I don't know what it is, or it should be more of this or more of that or less of that we already know. What if it's something really different? And that's what I got through Bonita Roy, who has read Gapster, if you can follow me, where he talks about the ever-present origin. Like, it's not that we just evolve in a linear way, or maybe most of the time we draw it like this, it goes up and up and up. Actually, every minute, everything that exists is there. And we drop into what he calls origin, and it's possible to come with something new, with all that was already before. So there is a possibility every moment to change. And just not linear. It can be like a phase transition. Like some people of you might have the experience from like suddenly, I understood, or suddenly I realized, and you become a different person, at least in some ways. And so I think in our society, we don't have that. I can only name it love for life, actually. Yeah. Like, suddenly.
Yeah, I wanted to say we don't have that yet. And now Rhea is going to bring her sunshine and ask a question.
Yeah, I'm wondering if there is a way to measure collective presence. And how do you know like when a group has achieved it, and if everyone in the group can sense it? Like, is it just like a knowing?
I wouldn't know how to measure it. But if one of the chapters in the book or pieces in the book is about the one next elegant minimal step. Like, we're in such complex domain. We don't know where it leads us. So if we, through a conversation, through a dialogue, we come to an understanding of, that's indeed the next step we can take. Not something very difficult, but something we feel like that follows naturally from where we are, from what we have discovered, or from what we have been talking about. And then you do that step, whatever that step is. And it might be like, oh, we need to talk some more sometimes, but sometimes it's an action. And I hope we get better and better at sensing like, this is a step we are going to take, and that's maybe a small action, but that, for me, that's the ultimate purpose of this whole practice, to actually come to actions in the world, and not for the purpose of, oh, let's have another good conversation that actually doesn't bring us much. But you have to practice a lot of conversations to become good at it. That's the other part.
All right, so we have one more question. Tanya's feeling into something. You have a question
ahead.
that's emerging, Tanya?
Yeah, well, I'm connecting a lot with what you're saying. It's making me like twitchy. I think, and I'm thinking of experience that I've had recently with a housemate, and we're part of a learning community, a larger learning community. And we communicate through Slack, and she was encouraging me to just write into the Slack without knowing like what I'm going to say. And it's similar to what you were pointing at. And I feel like there's both that encouraging people to just, like what you just did, Peter, you just invited me to just, and I was like, I'm just going to write, I have something I'm feeling into. I don't know what it is exactly. Thanks, Tyson. Yeah. There's a question too around how do we do this on Zoom, which is a whole other thing, and feel each other. But I feel like there's something around the like holding each other in a creative tension of our learning process. I really felt her doing that with me, and I've been doing that with her, where like she's had patterns that come up that get in her way. And I know I do in groups too, that where I like talk, and I'm talking from what we might call ego or old patterns and attachment. I think you're using that. But if we have this sort of agreement that we're like, she knows that I don't really want to do that, and I know she doesn't want to go into her old patterns. It's like we're holding each other, and we've made that vivid and clear. It changes the whole field. I don't know what the question is. I think there's just this sort of, I was hearing you connect it to sort of the individual process, and then I was feeling it in my experience of the collective that's happening.
I think it's really helpful if you make that explicit amongst yourself. This is a learning, or a way of learning, or a way of getting other ways of learning and knowing into the space. We're Western mind trained. It's most of the time very conceptual. very mental. Maybe in groups and circles, it's emotional, but there's also that energetic knowing, that intuition, that other ways of inner knowing. I think we desperately need to be in balance with all the rest. And if you say that's something I want to cultivate, or something that I want to train, or let's all train it, or make it explicit between you, and then you have the space to experiment and to learn from it, and come back to it like after 3 months or 1 month, say like what happened or what did you learn.
So I'm going to end it here, and I'm also going to send out an invitation to you, Ria. So how this emerged is that Richard put you on my radar multiple times. Like, you got to check out Ria. You got to check out Ria. And then somehow I got on your radar. You've been reading my journals, and then you reached out to me, and just saying how you liked the process of honesty of me putting myself out there. And I felt called to bring you on, and we're here. And I have a very strong sense that your gift to the world is finding the right question. And the Stoa, you're talking about the entrepreneurial spirit, and that's sort of like a difficulty. Yeah. So we're operating on the gift economy here at the Stoa. So we view the Stoa as a gift to the world, and whoever's inspired to give a gift to the Stoa can do so. And people have been giving me money, they've been giving me help, they've given me all kinds of things, which is I'm very grateful for. And what's interesting is people who are regular facilitators are launching off with this model and doing their own thing. So Colin Morris from the Existential Dance Party, he opened up his own digital dance studio about embodiment, and it's based off the gift economy. And then he's sort of the steward of that space. And Tyson, who's in the room right now, I imagine he's going to open up a digital rap studio one day, and then have that. He's been freestyling through a pandemic right now. And so you're very welcome to have a regular session here if you like, and you can be based off the gift economy. People can offer you gifts. I have the regular facilitators, and if it works, you can open up your own digital campfire.
Thank you. Yeah, we will have a session on Friday anyway.
Yeah.
So if there's interest, yeah, we can, because to really have a deep experience of collective presencing, one session of 1 hour or 1.5 is maybe not enough, but yeah, that's where we will start.
So would you like to talk about the session we're having, I think Thursday? Like, what can people expect?
Was it to me?
Yeah, sorry. That was to you. We have a question. Yeah, this Thursday we have an event with you, actually practice session, 90 minutes.
It's Friday, huh?
Was it Friday? April 24th.
Thursday. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, you're right. It's Friday. It's Friday. Yeah, that's it. The sunshine just keeps shining.
Yeah, we have to think about the question that's really speak to us, that we still need to do. That's alive in this space somehow. And we will just be in circle and have a talking piece mainly in the middle, after maybe a short check-in from everybody. And see what comes up. I don't know what's going to happen. You know? That's what we'll try to do. And I would be, can we feel each other on Zoom? You're amazed what you can do on Zoom. I fell in love on Zoom.
Amaze me.
Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, RSVP to the website to that event. I'll make some closing announcements in a moment, but thanks so much, Ria, for coming on, and I look forward to seeing you again on Friday. So tonight we have a couple of events that I'll mention. One that I'm hosting called Emancipate the Daemon at 6 p.m. I have no idea what that's going to be about. I'm waiting for the daemon to tell me. So if you're interested to find out, feel free to RSVP to that. Then right after that, which I think maybe the daemon event's foreshadowing this, is Building an Aesthetic Movement, with Rachel Haywire. I think if we're going to steal the culture, I think it's going to have to be fun and beautiful and artistic. So that being said, you can go to the gift economy if your daemon inspires you to provide a gift to the Stoa. And oh, Tyson would like to share something. Yes, because he has an event coming up on Saturday. So Tyson, feel free to go off mute.
Thank you, Peter. Yeah, I want to say to Tanya, I really felt you